was like, help!
Hey everyone, welcome. We're just going to give folks just a minute to get into the meeting and then we'll go ahead and get started. I always like to know where everyone's from, so you can put in the chat where you're from and also if you have good weather. I am in Philadelphia and it's cold here. So I'm always jealous of you Florida people, California people. And you guys are in Boston, right?
Yep. It was actually a pretty nice day in Boston today. It was like 45, 50 degrees, so can't complain.
Nice. Had a lot of snow this year?
No, because we're basically
I would love
actually
this.
our hospital is right on the water, so yeah. We don't get quite as much snow as deeper into uh Massachusetts.
Well, that's nice.
We get the water effect.
Hmm.
All right.
You like the snow like me.
I used to like it more than I do now. What about getting older? Um, all right.
Yeah.
Most of this, we had a lot of people in warm weather. Jealous. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome. Thanks everyone for coming. Big thanks to Olivia and Morgan. Olivia and Megan. Olivia Morgan and Megan Morris both work at Spaulding Rehab Hospital. Megan is the clinical nutrition manager and Olivia is a clinical dietitian. And they're going to talk to us tonight about nutrition. And before I forget, I just want to mention that we will have a Q&A at the end, and there is a Q&A feature on the webinar, which we'd appreciate it if you used. If you put questions in the chat, there's a solid chance that we won't see them. And I also wanted to mention that we have support group immediately after this meeting. It's our regular every Thursday support group. I will put the link in the chat. I'll put it now and then I'll put it again later. So just know that once this meeting is closed, you won't be able to get the link. So get it before I close this meeting. All right, without further ado, Olivia and Megan, I give you the floor.
Alrighty.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Oh, is it gonna
It's
start?
really exciting to see so many people across.
All
Oh
right,
no.
we have
There we go.
Australia represented. We got Canada.
No, I know. I'm excited about this international crew.
Love it.
I saw Canada.
We got Newfoundland and BC.
I know it's great. So
Oh,
we kind of planned like an all-inclusive. Yes, I know. And it's hellishly hot. A wide range. But we planned this presentation very broad to give kind of some introduction to some various topics that are definitely hot topics in the world of nutrition. But then also like how to navigate all of those recommendations and kind of take it in like an easy way so that you don't have to feel overwhelmed by it. It's a big thing that Olivia and I live by. So it's going to feel like kind of pretty broad, and then we'll try to narrow it down. And then we're really hoping for some questions throughout as well. So I'm Megan. I'm Megan. This
Yes.
is Olivia. We work
And I'm Olivia. Yes.
together,
So we have some
and we love
objectives
to do
today.
our presentations together. Yes. We don't need to go over those, but basically we want you to understand the basics of general healthy nutrition and honestly just not be stressed out about nutrition.
So we're going to first start with a big topic right now, which is gut health, right? So basically, there's two main components to our gut health. I feel like this is like a term that people are kind of throwing around, like I need to fuel my gut, I need to feed my gut, all that kind of stuff. Um, we have two main components that we're thinking about. We have the food for the bugs and the bugs themselves. So basically, there are bugs that live in our GI system. We call those probiotics. We want those bugs to have a wonderful, well-nourished life. We want them to live and prosper and enjoy themselves in our GI system. Um, in order to do so, they need to have plenty of food, and they actually really like to eat a variety of different stuff. And they prefer if you really try to mix it up with the foods that you give to it. So, for the food for the bugs, we're thinking about fiber. So, fiber is a material that is never going to be fully digested. So, it's moving through our system with those bugs. The bugs are kind of fueling off of it. A lot of the foods that are rich in prebiotics can actually cause a decent amount of gas for some people, which is fun. Just thinking about those bugs living a wonderful life. They're eating, they're maybe passing gas, and so we are also having a little bit of gas and bloating. So some of these things on the list of prebiotics, you may say, oh, I'm not sure how my stomach tolerates them. We want to think about maybe trying different options, trying different variations, well cooked versus raw. Oftentimes, well cooked can be a lot easier to tolerate. In terms of vegetables, we're thinking garlics, onions, leeks, shallots, like all in kind of like that onion family. Um, Grains, one of the really most rich foods in prebiotics is actually rye bread, which is a really fun fact. So if we have any rye bread lovers out there, that can be super helpful for us. Other things are going to be some chickpeas, beans. Again, we're thinking about a lot of these foods may be a little gas producing, but the probiotics are going to really enjoy dining on them. In order to get those probiotics from foods, we're thinking about foods that are fermented. The fermentation process basically creates those bugs. So we're thinking about yogurt, sauerkraut, pickles, miso, kefir, which is like a drinkable yogurt. Unfortunately, not all fermented foods are going to give us a probiotic because sometimes they are cooked and those probiotics are killed off. So sorry, the beer isn't necessarily going to give you what you need. And unfortunately, sourdough bread as well. Very delicious, but not going to be a great source of those probiotics. You can also take supplements that contain probiotics, but really thinking about ways that you can incorporate some food sources at least a couple times a week, just to try and make sure you're replenishing your GI health. So we got our variety of different foods for those probiotics, and then we have a variety of different bugs. So, fun first topic to kind of just get into the nitty-gritty.
We jumped right into the good stuff. But it does seem like gut health is a hot topic these days, not only here, but also for everybody. So is heart health. And heart health is not something that we can really ignore because it affects everybody. So there's two components to heart health, just like there were two components to gut health. But for heart health, there is salt and there's fat. So here on the left, you'll see the recommendations for fat, which hyperlipidemia just means like a high level of fat in your blood. So when your doctor takes what's called a lipid panel, they're checking your total cholesterol, which is a mix of your LDL or your bad cholesterol, your HDL or your good cholesterol, as well as a portion of your triglycerides, which is really just a measurement of like sugar in your body, basically. So we're really looking here at LDL when we're talking about fat and when we're talking about cutting out saturated fat, because that's what affects your cholesterol is saturated fat. There's been a lot of like in the past, the history is like, don't eat eggs, they contain cholesterol. But that type of cholesterol is actually not what affects your cholesterol. It's actually saturated fat. The way that Olivia and I like to remember almost everything is alliteration. So thinking of saturated fat is solid at room temperature, and it's going to be solid in your arteries. It's really morbid, but that is the best way to remember it. A stick of butter on the outside, a stick of butter on the inside. So how can we kind of mitigate some of that in terms of food? What can we do to decrease our cholesterol? Well, one, we are dietitians, so again and again, you'll hear us say increase your fruit and vegetable intake. It has great fiber, like Olivia was just mentioning, in terms of the prebiotics, but it also, that fiber is going to help kind of scrub out some of the bad cholesterol when you eat it. And it also kind of mimics cholesterol, so then your body makes less of it. Fun fact, your body also makes some cholesterol. So fruits and vegetables, again and again, we'll say it multiple times throughout this presentation, but also using oil. So thinking of oil as liquid outside, on your kitchen table, and it's going to be liquid in your body. So not like that stick of butter. So trying to cook with oil whenever you can, saving butter and other saturated fats like coconut oil for when you really want it. The big thing lately, or not lately, but in recent years, was coconut oil, and it is a saturated fat, so it's going to act similarly to butter. Another fiber, whole grains, like Olivia just mentioned, for the prebiotics. So you can already see we're kind of hitting on the same topics here. But whole grains are also going to help with cutting back, cutting down on your cholesterol, I should say. We were just talking this week about the Quaker Oat Man. He always says he's going to lower your cholesterol, and he's pretty gosh darn right. So if you want to increase your whole grains and also try to cut back on your cholesterol, oatmeal is a great option. We talk about it all the time. But other whole grain options, wheat bread, brown rice. We're not huge fans of wheat pasta, but that's okay. There's a time and place. Quinoa, other whole grains. And then, just trying to eat less processed. Processed foods do tend to be really high in saturated fat, and there's some trans fat. Olivia has a fun fact that she always mentions about, like, products can have some trans fat, but since they have such a small amount, they can list it as 0 because they round down, which is really, it's really tricky. So just in general, trying to eat less processed, and you'll already be getting less saturated fat in your diet. On the other side of things, we have sodium, and that is what contributes to hypertension. So hypertension just means high blood pressure. So this is the other side of heart health, because when you have high blood pressure, your heart is working so hard to pump blood throughout your body. So some ways to kind of cut back on sodium, which would help with hypertension, is to, one, look at a nutrition facts label. That will help with, if you're looking for saturated fat or trans fats, reading the ingredients, but also looking at how much sodium is in a product. We like to think of looking at sodium as thinking about a budget. You have a budget of money throughout the day. Similarly, you have a budget of sodium throughout the day. The recommendations for sodium is 2,000 milligrams per day. So if you cut that up for meals and snacks, you're eating about 500 milligrams for meals and maybe like 200 to 300 milligrams for snacks. And this primarily comes from your processed foods. So you'll have a nutrition facts label. Like if you go to eat an apple, obviously there's no nutrition facts label because there's no sodium in it. Cooking food at home can also help you cut down on the amount of salt that you're adding. You have the actual control of how much salt you want to add. You should add some salt because salt is flavorful and good, and you need some. Like, your body actually needs sodium to survive, but you don't need so much. Like, if you were to compare how much salt is in a home-cooked soup versus a soup can that you buy from the store, it's astronomically different. So again, choosing less processed foods, another thing that you'll hear us talk about many times. Seasoning with other herbs and spices as opposed to just salt. We talk a lot in the hospital about Mrs. Dash, or like a chef's seasoning that doesn't have salt. But even just like good old-fashioned Italian seasoning. What are some of our other favorite spices? I mean, black pepper is really good. Anything like that. If you are going to choose like a processed food, or you are going to go out to eat, just being aware that you're going to be puffy and your blood pressure is going to be higher. We always talk about, your puffy hands, your rings don't fit the day after you eat like Chinese food or pizza, or, there's like a list of, I think, like the top 6 or top 5 foods that are listed here, which is pizza, sandwiches, burritos, tacos, soups, cold cuts, and bread slash rolls. So anytime you eat those things, it's going to be quite high. And just keeping that in mind. It's not to say you can never enjoy those things, because what's life without a slice of pizza? But here we are again, eating more fruits and vegetables. That is what balances out the sodium. So if you are going to eat out, or you're going to, grab a can of soup because it's easier, anytime you're eating out or you're eating a processed food, just remember that it really is very much lacking in the fruit and vegetable component. And what fruits and vegetables provide is potassium, which helps to balance out the sodium in your body. There is something called a sodium potassium pump. You don't need to know about that. It's really intricate. But basically, if you eat more fruits and vegetables, you'll get more potassium in your body, and then it will help balance out the salt that you're eating. And you'll get more prebiotics and all of that good stuff. And lastly, a good old fun fact is that you can just rinse your beans and get rid of like 50% of the sodium. So you can still have your canned beans. Cooking them from scratch is just really hard.
Okay, this is all actually a big ploy to try to get people to eat more vegetables. We're basically creating a whole entire like presentation on the different reasons why you should eat more fruits and vegetables. Up next is inflammation. So trying to break it down into a couple of very specific, eat more, eat less, like kind of trying to keep it a little bit more simple, because inflammation is something that online, everyone's talking about in anti-inflammation diet. And some of it is true and some of it is a little overblown. So the basics of it, we want to really try to eat more fruits and vegetables. Again, crazy. But the reason is because the more colors that we are getting in our diet from fruits and vegetables, the more phytochemicals we are getting in our diet, because each different color contains different phytochemicals. And the stronger the color of the fruit or the vegetable, the more phytochemicals it contains, which is why we hear so much positive press about kale and Swiss chard, and no one is ever talking about iceberg lettuce, because objectively, the kale is much higher in phytochemicals. So it's not that the iceberg is bad, it just doesn't quite compare to our good friend the kale. So thinking about throughout the week, am I getting a variety of different colors? Do I lack in the reds or the blues? Sometimes, depending on the time of year, one can be more or less challenging, depending on where you are as well in the world right now. We have all kinds of different produce available. But really trying to hit that variety. That gives us the phytochemicals, have all kinds of different benefits that you see here. The different colors also provide antioxidants as well. So that is another component that helps to kind of fight against some of the natural inflammation in our body. The other thing we want to try to eat more of is foods that are rich in omega-3s. So that we're really thinking about fatty fish. We're thinking about our liquid fats like olive oil. We're thinking about nuts, especially walnuts. Walnuts have a particularly high amount of omega-3s. And then some additional things that have a good amount of omega-3s are like flaxseed meal, chia seeds, and hemp seeds. Actually, just 1 tablespoon of either the flax, chia, or the hemp seed provides you with the equivalent of like taking a fish oil supplement. So kind of an easy swap there, and may even actually be cost savings for you.
And no
Um,
fishy burps.
yeah, no fishy burps. The fishy burps are tough. Other things we want to try to get more of is in general fiber. In increasing our daily fiber intake, it can actually help to quell some of that natural inflammation that's in our body. So again, it sounds extremely simple, but all of these things really do contribute to these important topics that we're thinking about today. And then what should we eat less of? So we're really thinking about our saturated fat. So same thing, that fat that's solid at room temperature, because it's going to be solid at room temperature, it's solid in our arteries, and that can restrict blood flow to different areas of our body, and that can be not great for some of our inflammation. So we're thinking, how can we limit some of those saturated fats, switch to more of those omega-3 rich fats? We want to try to eat less red meat, trying to keep it to like one time a week in general, leaning into more of those like lower fat red meat options as well. It's like leaner cuts of beef, leaner cuts of pork. Really trying to limit some of those processed meats, hot dogs, bacon, ham. They kind of have the double whammy of being a red meat that's high in saturated fat, but also have a lot of added sodium. So all of that kind of contributes in a direct but indirect way to our inflammation. The last thing we want to try to eat less of is added sugar, which the holiday season is a little bit more challenging, but really trying to think about, avoiding sugar in places where it doesn't matter as much, right? So like I can forgo the sugar in my yogurt, and I can, do a much lower sugar granola. But if I want a cookie, I'm gonna eat a cookie and there's gonna be sugar in it. And that's a more of a priority for me than having the sugar in my yogurt. There are some foods that do have some special anti-inflammatory benefits, specifically a lot of the dark colored foods. So we think about dark cherries, berries, the dark leafy greens, and then a number of our omega-3 rich foods, so our fatty fish, walnuts, and olive oil. These are just some foods specifically that have had a ton of research on their anti-inflammatory benefits. And so we kind of talk about them, specifically.
Okay, so another big topic lately is brain health. Um, there is a newer diet out there in terms of, there used to be like the DASH diet, and what was the other one called? There was another one out there. I can't remember what it was called at this point. But now there is the MIND diet. Easy to remember for brain health because your mind. So it goes more into specifics about what you should eat every day, what you should eat every week, and then what you should try to limit. It's, again, very similar to what we've talked about for either gut health, heart health, or inflammation. There's a focus on eating whole grains every day. We've already talked about whole grains and what they are, but there's a list of some options here. It does mention that you should eat at least one vegetable a day. And this is not counting your leafy greens. That's pretty easy. Who here likes like carrots? There you go. You're already hitting that. But having a vegetable every day. When you're looking at every week, you should be having at least 6 servings of leafy greens. That's like what Olivia was mentioning on the previous slide with the dark leafy greens. We're not talking about iceberg lettuce. We're really talking about like kale, spinach, Swiss chard, those types of really dark greens. And that's almost every day. So even thinking like, okay, I should have at least one vegetable and one leafy green every day. It also recommends having at least 5 servings of nuts. This could be nuts or nut butter. So peanut butter lovers out there, rejoice, because you can have that every day and you're already hitting that goal. Also increasing the amount of beans that you're eating. I mean, honestly, I don't think I'm eating at least 4 servings of beans a week, but I certainly try to, and that can be in the form of hummus, tofu, or your standard like kidney, black beans, chickpeas, etc. And then not increasing, but having at least 2 servings of poultry a week. That seems pretty easy. But if we think about like most people are eating probably more red meat than they are chicken, so trying to swing that proportion more to the chicken side. And then also having 2 servings or more of berries a week. This can be easier in the summer when berries are in season, but thinking too that frozen berries are just as nutritionally dense as fresh berries. So trying to keep those on hand for when berries are not in season, they're more expensive. Throwing them in your oatmeal, you get a win-win there, whole grains and your berries. Top it with some peanut butter. Look at you, you're already starting the day off strong. When we're thinking about what to eat less of, it does say to have no more than 5 servings of sweets per week. That's pretty generous. That's almost a sweet every day. And that's kind of what Olivia was talking about is thinking about what sweets are you choosing, and does this really like satisfy my urge, my need need for something sweet. Somebody in the chat, and I was laughing at the chat earlier because I'm really loving this conversation. Someone was talking about like Fruity Pebbles and Skittles because we frequently get that joke about eating the rainbow. But like, do Skittles really like, I can't even think of the saying that I'm thinking about right now because it's 7:30 at night and my brain doesn't work at this time. But are Skittles like really going to satisfy the urge that you're having for something sweet? Or do you want like that homemade piece of cake that your mom made and, it reminds you of your childhood? It really doesn't matter. Everyone's different. But also thinking about your red meat per week, having at most 4 servings of red meat and really thinking about the serving size. A serving of meat is about the size of the palm of your hand. So keeping that in mind, because oftentimes if we go out to eat, the servings of red meat, if you're ordering like a steak or something, is a lot bigger than 1 portion. All right, the really, really hard one here is that you should only be having 1 serving of cheese per week, and a serving of cheese is the tip of your thumb. So like that big. That's literally like a baby bell cheese. That is so, so sad. I know Joe's on here. He even said he was a cheesehead in the chat. I don't know if you're going to be able to hit this one because I'm not, but it's really challenging. And then also trying to limit your fried food, which obviously that makes sense because fried food, cheese, red meat, higher in saturated fats, not as heart healthy, not as brain healthy. So the ones to kind of point out for brain health is berries. So increasing your berry intake and increasing your leafy green intake. We do tend to like to focus more on what you can increase rather than decrease. But in this case, cheese is the one to highlight. Oh my gosh, What a question. How about kangaroo? Does that qualify as red meat? Never had that question. I can honestly say I don't know.
We're going to have to do some deep Google to obtain the answers to that one. Okay, so kind of we went through a lot of hot button issues right now, and we're really giving you the information that is backed by research, backed by science, like the stuff that clinically we see work and be effective for our patients. When we do all 4 of those topics in pretty quick succession, you see a lot of commonalities, right? Like we can really see the lines between gut health, heart health, inflammation, and brain health. They all go together because if you do not have a healthy gut, that can affect every other piece. If your heart's not, if you have hypertension, everything kind of affects each other. So to put it a little bit more basic, with the gut health, we're eating a variety of high fiber foods and maybe throwing a fermented food in there here or there. For heart health, we're thinking, again, high fiber, trying to be more mindful of our sodium intake as well as our saturated fat. For inflammation, high fiber, and also a variety of colors of our fruits and vegetables, and trying to limit some excess sugar and saturated fat. So layering a little bit more there. And then brain health, I think it's a little bit more specific. The diet specifically, the mind diet is a little bit more specific, and I like the way that they kind of tailor to like adding specific things in throughout the week versus really just like how little you need to eat of some of the other things. But trying to get in more of the produce, more of those dark colors, and limit some of those foods that are higher in saturated fat. So what does that all come down to, right? It comes down to eating a variety of fruits and vegetables. It comes down to getting fiber from beans and whole grains, and really trying to limit processed foods. So it ends up being a little bit more simple than what we would initially expect. And wow,
All right, so let's put it all.
we're trying to avoid making people feel overwhelmed. That's a hard.
I was going to say someone's feeling a little stressed about their intake of cheese so far.
The cheese is kind of the most shocking one, right? That's a little bit more challenging. We really like to use this Harvard Healthy Eating Plate because it kind of takes all of the stuff that we talked about in the different sections and it puts it into like what does a meal actually look like, right? Because in order to feel full and satisfied, we need certain things at our meal. We want to feel full and satisfied because if we don't, we will be reaching for the cheese and the sweets and the other things that are a little bit more tempting. So the principle is we want a quarter of our plate to be grains, carbohydrates, ideally grains that are whole grains, high fiber grains. The other quarter we want to be protein, thinking more about our lower saturated fat protein options and really leaning into fish and beans, probably a little bit more than we even do right now. The remaining half of our plate, we want to be leaning into all of those different colors of fruits and vegetables. Most of the time at lunches and dinners, we're getting more vegetables, and then at breakfast is maybe where we're getting more of those fruits in there. Our oil is going to come in throughout the plate because that's what we're using to prepare it. And we're making sure that we're staying hydrated because it's dry out there. We got to be careful.
So what does that look like? I mean, we talk about this all the time. We talk about the plate method and really just trying to make half of your plate mostly vegetables, some fruits. I don't know that many people that are eating half of their plate of vegetables at breakfast. I'm certainly not. So we tend to give a little bit more leeway with breakfast of really just trying to make sure you're getting some carbs with some fiber. If you're reaching for a piece of toast, maybe we reach for a wheat toast, a rye toast, then you're getting, some was it prebiotics? Yeah, prebiotics. Are you getting some protein, and what type of protein? We're not going to recommend bacon every day. You could have bacon every once in a while. Maybe some eggs. Someone's mentioning cottage cheese in the chat, also a great protein option, especially at breakfast. Yogurt. Maybe you're getting your nuts, your nut butter at this time of day, and then maybe just some sort of, like, usually people are eating fruit at breakfast, so maybe choosing a fruit at breakfast. But if you're getting an omelet, maybe get an omelet with some vegetables, switch it up. But just being mindful, like, okay, trying to increase vegetables. If you start there, you'll definitely get some success.
Then when we go to our lunch and dinner, that's when we're getting that other half plate of vegetables. And there's definitely value in the consistency, right? Like we don't emphasize 3 meals a day just because we do like food, so that's kind of part of the reason. But if you go too long between eating opportunities, what happens is you end up getting ravenously hungry. When you get ravenously hungry, your brain is very smart and it goes for what it needs most. And it's not going for carrot sticks, it's going for quick digesting carbohydrates. So, trying to avoid getting to that point by having balanced meals consistently throughout the day can be super advantageous.
Well said.
But then a lot of the times, 3 meals don't even cut it. Sometimes we need to incorporate snacks as well, especially if it's going to be more than 4 or 5 hours between eating opportunities. This happens for a lot of people between lunch and dinner, just because a lot of times we're having lunch around noon and then dinner, anywhere from 6 to 7, 8 p.m. even sometimes. Um, when we're pushing dinner quite late, we often end up getting a little too hungry at that point. And we're then ordering takeout and maybe not cooking stuff at home like we know that we should. So, incorporating a snack, and even sometimes a little bit ahead of when you start to get really hungry, is very important. We're always incorporating carbohydrates and protein together because it helps give us the most balanced energy. And we have some little suggestions here where you can kind of pick one carb and pick another protein and put it together, and that makes a balanced snack. There are definitely going to be some foods that naturally have some carbohydrates and protein together. Like if you make a smoothie that has some fruit and yogurt in it, that's going to have carbs from the fruit and protein from the yogurt. You can find a granola bar that has some natural carbohydrates as well as protein as well. We just like to emphasize the whole foods because it gives a nice variety. And I sometimes think that having two parts to a snack actually makes it feel more satisfying versus having, one part that combines both carbohydrates and protein. So there can be value in that for sure. The
Oh,
reason,
Olivia's favorite slide.
yeah, I was gonna say this, I'm very passionate about this slide because you have all in this group felt all of these things. So, we like to use pancake breakfast as the best way to describe how carbohydrates hit your system. If anyone's ever had pancakes for breakfast, it's usually pancakes with some syrup and maybe a little bit of butter. And it's a pretty big portion and it makes you feel really, really full. But no less than 90 minutes later, you're likely to be feeling kind of hungry. And that's because the pancakes with the syrup are really just giving you carbohydrates, which are giving your body quick energy. But by the time that energy drops down, that blood sugar level drops down, that's when you start to get ravenously hungry. So even though you've had this full meal, you're still not getting energy that actually sustains you. When we just have a meal that's only protein or only fat, which I see a lot of times when people are having almonds on their own as a snack or like a handful of nuts as a snack, people feel like, oh my gosh, I need to eat so many of these nuts in order to feel satisfied. And that's because those foods are only offering you protein and fat. That provides you more slow, sustained energy, but doesn't give you that quick hit that the carbohydrates do. So that's really why the magic in how we build our day and how we build our meals and snacks is in combining sources of carbohydrates along with sources of protein and fat. I will say, having a carbohydrate that contains some fiber will help to kind of slow down that rise and fall, but you're still going to feel that, that's more significant level of hunger if, say, for instance, you have just a piece of fruit for a mid-afternoon snack versus having a piece of fruit with a couple of those nuts or a handful or a little bit of peanut butter or maybe a cheese stick, because we're being mindful about our cheese intake. But it is a good, quick way to get a little bit of protein in there. So we talk about this in the form of blood sugar, but it really is also affecting us in the way of like how our energy level feels. And that's why we really want to be making those balanced meals that have all of those different components together so that we feel full and satisfied and aren't craving and leaning into more of the foods that are not quite as nourishing for us.
Okay, my favorite thing to talk about. So we've talked about like all of these different things and how to be healthier, but there were some people talking in the chat about like, oh, it's the holidays. This is the hardest time to be talking about this. But another thing that we like to talk about is the fact that we are all human. We are all going to indulge here and there, and we're all going to have parties to go to and holidays to celebrate. And that certainly means that we should enjoy those times. So there are some tips for how to indulge and still feel okay about it. Whether it be thinking about like, what are you valuing more right now? Are you valuing time with your family? Are you more valuing your health? If you're more valuing convenience, etc., that can certainly play into, what you're choosing at the grocery store. Some people, if they're looking more for convenience, maybe they're choosing something a little bit more processed, but maybe in the back of your mind, you're thinking, okay, let's make sure that I'm adding some produce, I'm adding some fruits and vegetables. But also, how can you make simple swaps on a day-to-day basis? Maybe you have more parties, or maybe you're less in control of what you're cooking on a day-to-day basis. How can you still make some swaps that really play into your health? Maybe it's choosing a whole grain instead of a white bread. Maybe it's looking at how many fruits and vegetables you're eating and what variety you're getting, and how can you change that up a bit. Maybe you're asking for help. Maybe you're telling somebody, I really want to start eating healthier. How am I able to kind of fit that in with my lifestyle? Maybe you can ask your family to join in. Treats. Treats are meant to be a treat. It's definitely not meant to be a never thing. If anyone's ever tried giving up something that they really love, that's all you ever think about. So trying to enjoy treats in moderation, and certainly thinking about what treats like really bring you joy and what don't. So I talked about like birthday cake. We're talking about holidays because it is the holidays. enjoying the food that comes around once in a while. A lot of what we're talking about today is how to be healthier on a day-to-day basis and really not worrying as much about those special occasions, like when you go out to eat for a special occasion, when you have holiday parties, etc.
We had a really good example recently with someone who at Thanksgiving they really value having a homemade piece of apple pie. So when they built their dinner plate, they added, tons of protein, they added some vegetables, and they didn't lean quite as much into the starch options because they knew they wanted to allow room for that indulgent piece of pie. So like kind of finding ways to make it work within the meal as well can be helpful.
Okay, so just some quick little things here for having a healthier holiday. Olivia and I always talk about making sure you're having a well-rounded breakfast, which we've already talked about on here earlier. So some protein, whole grains, and some fruit. Also trying to add produce to your menu. If you're not in charge of the menu, but you're able to bring something, maybe you bring a vegetable. So then you know that you have something there that's a little bit more nutrient dense. For people that are able to move their body, just moving your body in a way that feels good for you so that you are, exercising a bit before indulging a bit more. And then Olivia said it very well, making sure you hydrate. We all feel better when we're well hydrated. And oftentimes we're not drinking enough and it's really dry out. So treating your body well. But you can always choose a smaller plate or a bowl. When you're at a buffet or at a table and getting all of your delicious food for a holiday dinner, like I said on the previous few slides, you can focus on your time with your family and friends and less on the food. I know that's easier said than done, but try to take a step away from the food table. You can also be strategic at the buffet. So what I like to do is kind of look at everything that's on the table and decide, okay, what do I actually really want? It can be really easy to pick a little bit of everything, and then your plate is really piled up. Olivia also mentioned a good point earlier too about not going too long without eating. A lot of people like to kind of hold off and skip breakfast, skip lunch because they know that they have a big meal coming up, but that can actually lead to eating more in the long run. So trying not to skip meals and being more mindful when you're eating. But like I said too, like trying not to stress out too much about your special occasions, your parties, and your holiday treats because it does come around once in a while. A big thing that contributes to inflammation is actually stress. So try not to stress out too much about what you are eating.
All right, so we do have a couple of references because we talked about the MIND diet, healthy eating plate, as well as a couple of things about prebiotics and probiotics in case anyone has any additional questions. But I think we have quite the active. I was just trying to catch up on the chat. It's been quite active, and I know that we have a number of different questions. So,
We do.
um,
All right, do you want to stop sharing and then we can see your
yeah,
beautiful?
sure, that'd be perfect.
Awesome. All right, let's just get this question out of the way. Is it possible to get the slides?
Yeah, of course.
That would be wonderful. If you send them to me, I will send them
Yeah,
out
no problem.
to the group. Okay. If you're following the chat at all, you've probably noticed that there's this whole thing about probiotics. So one of our doctors in our community saw several patients that were taking probiotics and had bleeds associated with their CCMs. And so there's not like hard research on it, but his feeling was let's just err on the side of caution and not take probiotics. So the thinking is it's probably okay to have probiotics in food, but taking like a supplemental probiotic is iffy. So my personal recommendation is to ask your own medical providers what they recommend for you and your situation.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I'll say probably the biggest thing is that supplements in the United States at least are not usually regulated, right? So that's probably the biggest risk you take with taking any sort of supplementation, which is why our entire presentation today was focused on food. There's just a lot more question marks whenever you delve into supplementation, unless you're getting a product that is either USP certified, NSF certified, or Informed Sport certified. Getting anything from food, there's much lower risk with getting things from food. It's in much smaller amounts than what you would ever get from supplementation. And your body is well equipped at handling the foods that you are able to take in.
Any thoughts on like bad gut bugs and, are certain things going to, we would like to not encourage the bad gut bugs. Any thoughts on how to do that?
Megan?
Oh golly. I mean, the bad gut, the bad gut bugs, that's hard to say. Typically the bad bugs that you get are, like illness related. If we're feeding our good bugs, generally will create a positive environment. So that's where you want to make sure that you're, eating plenty of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, etc. Having some dairy so that you are getting some of the probiotics from food. Like Olivia said, I wouldn't we're not here to recommend that you're taking supplements. That's not something that we actually ever really recommend unless somebody actually needs them. But we do need to outline that, like, unfortunately, when we go on medications, it can kind of rid our body of the good bugs, and then the bad bugs kind of predominate. So it can be helpful to kind of just stay on top of eating a wide variety of more nutrient dense foods. That's the best I can say it.
Very good. All right. Is it possible to eat too much fiber to the point of harming yourself?
Yes, it is. You can eat too much fiber, 100%. Fiber excretes
You won't.
stuff as it moves through our body. And in excreting some of that stuff, you will lose some micronutrients. And you can also eat so much fiber that you can't eat enough of the other things that your body needs. Um, and a lot of times it causes some bloating and significant GI discomfort as well. So really we're aiming for around 25 to 30 grams of fiber a day. If we're going up to like 35, 40, then things are still in a pretty solid range. If we're going more than 60 grams of fiber a day, we've gone astray and we need to maybe make sure that we're getting enough of the other components of our diet as well.
Mhm. And drinking plenty of water. If you're not drinking enough water and you're increasing your fiber intake, you will experience a lot of GI distress. And when we're talking about fiber too, we can't not mention, like, there are fiber rich processed foods which tend to have a
Oh,
Oh,
she got stuck. No, what she's trying to say is that fiber-rich foods have an exorbitant amount of fiber in them. Some of those processed foods, they can actually even contain like even 30 grams of fiber in one serving. So like your entire day's worth of fiber in one particular food, which is not going to feel good for anyone. And it's also just tends to be like very gas producing. So an unpleasant experience for everyone involved.
got it. And I also was under the impression it's better to like you should ease up on the like go up gradually. Don't go to
Yes.
40 all at once in the same time, and you will have less upset tummy.
Yes. Anytime if you're making something, if you're like, oh, this presentation has really inspired me, I need to make sure I'm eating enough of my fruits and vegetables, blah, blah, blah. You definitely want to take it gradually. If you go, 0 to kale salad, it's going to be an aggressive shift in your GI health. So we have to make some gradual shifts.
Got it. All right, we have a question, and I'm going to tag it onto another question that I have on my other list of questions. So, when it comes to fruits and vegetables, does organic matter or is non-organic equally okay? And then also, I know you mentioned that with berries, frozen was okay, but does the form matter? Does it matter if it's dried or frozen or canned?
Uh,
so
Go ahead, Megan.
I feel bad because my computer
No,
froze, so
no,
I'll
you figured
be
it out.
happy to take this one. So oftentimes people feel like frozen or canned, it does it it is more processed, and we're over here saying eat less processed. But if you look at the ingredients, a lot of times those foods are canned or bagged with like very minimal added ingredients. As long as you're getting like the vegetables that are not packaged in a bag, like with a cheese sauce or something, like usually it should just be the vegetable, maybe a little bit of salt, and water. So canned and frozen are great options. That's one of the things that I like to highlight with, like, if you are paying more attention to your finances or you're looking more for convenience, it's certainly okay to choose something that's not organic or a little bit more processed to help with time management and finances. But if you do value those things, if you value organic and you want to buy organic, you certainly can. But you'll get a lot of the same nutrients from foods that are not organic.
Very good. When you guys were talking about the mind diet, there was two questions that came up in the chat, and one was about chicken, so why only two servings
Oh
a
yeah.
week, and the other was about eggs. It didn't seem to note eggs at all.
Yeah, this diet is very interesting because it takes into account the Mediterranean diet and the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, or the DASH diet. So they're really just highlighting like the specific like points that you want to hit. With like eat more, they're really just saying like you want to eat at least this much throughout the week, right? So like I would say like eating two servings of chicken per week, like I would say a lot of us are getting more than that. But on the other hand, we're probably not getting enough legumes, and maybe fish is also lacking as well. So it's not necessarily like only eat two, it's more just like you should eat two.
Okay.
They don't mention eggs on there, which is interesting. You're right. They don't necessarily mention like every single like call every single food out by nature. It's a more Mediterranean diet leaning format. They just don't offer like specific like you must eat two eggs a day in order to help your brain health.
Got it. Um, so we have a question about natural flavors and whether or not they could be emulsifiers or processed, which in the CCM world, we avoid emulsifiers because they can have a negative impact on gut health. So, do you guys have any thoughts on that? Those natural flavors, they can be tricky.
I mean, I would say I go back to like you try to eat more of the whole foods, right? Like we're trying to
Mm-hmm.
get more of those whole foods where we don't even have to think about like is there natural flavors in something? Is there emulsifiers in something?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, all right. How do we feel about soluble versus non-soluble fiber?
Our favorite topic. Um, so soluble and insoluble fiber, it's really hard to kind of cut the two apart because a lot of foods are a mix. Actually, most foods are a mix of soluble and insoluble fiber. They play two very different roles in your body in terms of GI health, and soluble fiber is the one that contributes to heart health. So soluble fiber kind of is what scrubs out the bad cholesterol in your body. So that's how that can be more heart healthy, like the Quaker Oats man. So oatmeal is higher in soluble fiber. But in terms of gut health and bowel regularity, soluble fiber is going to be more constipating, and that is like your oatmeal, bananas. And insoluble fiber is going to help more with kind of moving things along. So, you think corn, like fruit skins, a salad, things like that. So honestly, I don't kind of lean one way or the other in terms of soluble or insoluble fiber. They both have their benefits, and any type of fiber is great because a lot of people are just in general not eating enough fiber.
Great. What about sugar substitutes like stevia and then some of the ones that are, the NutraSweet and those sorts of things?
I mean, I would say that so if you've ever tried to consume any of them, like on their own, it is the most unpleasant experience you will ever have. They are extremely sweet, like beyond the point of actually being any reasonable level of sweet. So they can definitely classically condition us to expect foods to be extremely sweet. The other thing that can happen is some of the non-nutritive sweeteners can result in some GI distress, because they can draw a lot of water into our GI system. because they're so concentrated, because they're so sweet, our body is naturally going to try and dilute that, and that can, make an uncomfortable situation for some people. There was a weird trend a while ago where people were ordering the sugar-free gummy bears and having explosive diarrhea. So that's a fun YouTube watch if you're interested. So I uh, I would say if I'm going to have something that has a sweet flavor, I would actually prefer it to have some sugar in it. Um, and just try and limit the total quantity that I'm going to have.
Got it. Thanks. All right, we're running a little bit low on time. I have a couple questions
Yeah.
left. Um, what are your thoughts on balancing omega-3 and omega-6?
Usually what I'll just encourage people to do is like it takes a lot more effort to try and actually get some of the omega-3s in our diet. So usually by trying to increase some of the omega-3s, we're kind of naturally increasing that ratio. And I just kind of tell people that, we don't necessarily need to overemphasize those omega-6s. We're just trying to increase those omega-3s.
Okay, very good. And then let's end on this one. Do you guys have recommendations for the type of person one would look for if they were trying to find someone to help them design a meal plan?
I mean, some dietitians will focus on that. So if you are looking for a one-on-one sit down with an outpatient dietitian, I will say not every dietitian promotes that just because we like to emphasize that people stray from a plan. People have, other commitments, other priorities, and we do try to focus on how can people still make their choices about meals on a day-to-day basis. But there are some outpatient dietitians that will make meal plans and provide more structured recommendations, if you will.
Great. I've seen these the online ones too that seem like they take insurance, and that seems like a fairly straightforward option for some of our folks I know have trouble getting out and about, so that might be an
Yeah.
option.
Mm-hmm.
No, there's
Yep.
definitely you can definitely find a telemedicine provider. Where I work at Spaulding, I can provide telemedicine care to anyone in the state of Massachusetts. In the United States, usually it's a provider has to be licensed within your state. So if you can find someone who kind of fits that bill, there's definitely people out there for you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, well, let's end with that. You guys have been amazing. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us,
Yeah, of course.
and also thanks to Joe and John for introducing us to you guys. We appreciate them. You guys we really appreciate you coming and hanging out.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
Before I forget, I did drop the link in the chat for support group. We're going to go there now. We'll probably talk more about food and nutrition there. So if you want to come hang out in support group, come join us over there. The link is in the chat. And yeah, thank you. Thank you guys again. We really
Yeah,
appreciate
no
it.
problem. Thanks, guys. Have a
You're
good night.
welcome.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.